What's that story you've never been able to tell? You/taught the odd god. About 6 months ago, I was very close to suicide. I actually was about to do it. Thinking about killing myself, and at one point I had agreed to myself I would end it. I got home that night and it was just me and my cat as my fiancée was at work. My cat, I think she knew I was sad, and she never sits in people's laps, sat up in my lap and proceeded to flip on her belly and play wrestle with my hand. I broke down for about 3 hours. My fiancée came home knowing none the wiser, but had brought my favorite dish from her work, brewery, 'cause she knew I was feeling down. I've never told her that was the night I decided not to pull the trigger. You/_least_off these_, this is probably going to get lost, but I just want to put it out into the void. I'm a recovering drug addict. I dropped out of school but would still show up on campus to pick up drugs or meet people. I was sitting outside the cafe one night waiting on some pills. I weighed 100 pounds soaking wet and hadn't eaten in days. There was this girl in the honors program with me when I was still enrolled, and we had many classes in that program together. She was a unique young lady. My friend and I bullied her in the past and didn't try to hide it. She walked by and asked me how I was, and I was so clearly sick. There was an awkward silence and she asked me if she could buy me some food. She took me into the cafe and bought me a cookie. I said thank you and we parted ways. I cried so hard that night. I was overwhelmed with guilt and gratitude and shame. I never saw her again. That was about 8 years ago and I remember it clearly, down to what I was wearing. I don't remember her name, but I will never forget her kindness. It was a bright moment in an otherwise sad time in my life. Wherever she is, I wish I could thank her. You/Theo Reddit, 2014. It was my first night in college. My roommates, strangers, didn't show up. We lived in a 3-story apartment complex, with 4 apartments each level in a freshman building. Well, the neighbors are partying and I get out of my comfort zone and walk outside. Outside, some guys are drinking and one of the guys invites me in to party, and so begins my college experience. Lo and behold, I get wasted just like many of the others. I head back to my apartment on the same level and the party has moved slightly to my apartment, but there are just like 6 people there. I start asking people to leave as I'm going to bed, but I'm so drunk, I know I don't care if they stay or go. I go to my room and there is a guy crashed in it. I tell him he doesn't need to leave, but please move over, and he does. I wake up and freak out because I have a boyfriend. I check to make sure we didn't have sex. No, but you came into my apartment asking everyone to leave and told me I could stay in your bed and hopped in. Confused, I ask him to clarify. Dude, this isn't your apartment. Took about 30 seconds to realize I just arrived at the wrong apartment and slept in a stranger's bed, my first night in college. You/deleted, my uncle sexually assaulted me for a number of times when I was a kid, around when I was in primary school. I didn't even understand what was happening back then, but it just didn't feel good. I started to hide whenever he was around, either in the closet or under the bed. Sometimes my younger brother would hide with me too, thinking it was some kind of game. He eventually stopped coming. I later learned that he got divorced with my biological aunt. I'm 23 now and has never told one soul about it yet. Growing up, I'm just trying to not let it bother me. Seems like the older I get, the harder it is for me to tell someone physically about it. This is the first time I'm writing this online too. Even then, I feel like I'm letting out my burden. I'm glad I came across this post. I'm not sure if it has something to do with it, maybe it does a bit, but I still can't get into any serious romantic relationships. It's so hard for me to trust guys. I even get scared thinking of having sex with someone. You/digitalmsmooth, in 1999 I was a senior in high school and performing a fun and innocent senior prank. Towards the end of the school year was tradition for us, as is most American high schools. There were various bands of me and my fellow seniors conjuring up innocent and fun ideas to somehow get school cancelled for the day. Being a bit of a merry prankster myself, I was happy to take the lead on communicating, organizing, and executing the prank. Much infighting ensued about what to do between the various senior cliques. We were deadlocked and plans had all but fizzled. A breakthrough came when my father made my brother and I helped clean out a neighbor's garage packed to the brim with 40 years of junk. Didn't take long for me to open a box and find what looked like a stick of dynamite labeled marine smoke flare, or something like that. This was absolutely not getting thrown out and found a new home in the trunk of my car. April 20th, 4/20 man, was right around the corner, and as most of us in high school were stoners, I thought it'd be funny to light it off somewhere that day. Fast forward to April 20th, 99, and no prank had officially been settled on amongst the cliques. I decided on a whim. During a very unsupervised study period, and without telling a soul, I said fuck it, went to the student parking lot, grabbed the marine smoke flare out of my trunk and headed for the main stairwell. The main stairwell was the only stairwell that connected all 3 floors of our relatively small high school. More importantly, there was a small shaft between the looping stairs that went from the 3rd floor to the basement floor, so I ignited the smoke flare and dropped it down the shaft and boogied back to study hall without anyone knowing I was gone. Mind you, my study hall room was probably the furthest room in the school from the main hallway, so I figured no one would suspect me. Maybe a minute later the fire alarm went off and the reality of the situation hit home. As me and fellow students stepped into the hallway to exit the school, the entire hallway outside the study hall was filled with thick blue smoke. This hallway was 1 floor up and far from where I actually lit off the smoke flare, and the smoke was so thick we couldn't find the exit. I couldn't imagine how thick the smoke was in the stairwell and adjacent hallways connected to it. I was instantly filled with deep regret and my nerves were beyond shook. I thought I was going to puke. Did I just trap and kill the entire high school for a stupid senior prank? We literally had to crawl on our hands and knees and hug the wall until we saw the bright orange light of the exit sign. We were choking, gasping on the smoke, but managed to get out safely. Upon exiting the building, it seemed like all the town's police and fire trucks were already on scene. I was actually impressed with their response time, but the reason for that will come in a few. As the firemen geared up and rushed inside, police and teachers ushered all of us as far away from the school as was safe. It was then when I turned back and got the full glimpse of the situation. Out of almost every open door, window, and orifice that led outside poured the thickest, dankest, bluest smoke I'd ever seen. I'd come to find out later that the smoke flare I ignited is used for when you're stranded at sea and can cover a number of square miles with smoke. Hundreds of students and teachers surrounded the entire school in bewilderment and fear of what was transpiring, some hysterically crying. Parents had caught word and began racing to the school to make sure their little Johnny and Susie were all right, understandably. At one point I remember being so weak, afraid, remorseful that I actually fell to my knees and laid down. I literally couldn't move. I just knew at any moment firefighters would start emerging from the school with dead students, friends, and teachers. The police presence had grown from the township cops to the county SWAT unit who were decked out in heavy military gear. My life once again flashed before my eyes. That was it, I was going away for life. That thought would not stop racing through my mind. It was about 2 hours into the whole ordeal when the smoke finally cleared out of the school. I hadn't seen any bodies or injuries pulled out and the students were no longer crying. It seemed an air of calm began to emerge. The SWAT team was the first to leave, and the cops and firefighters were kind of joking around with each other, so I began to feel that maybe at the very least I wasn't going to jail for murder. The scene had cleared, and there were in fact no injuries or deaths, thank fucking Christ. Deemed safe to re-enter, the entire school was then ushered into the gym where almost immediately police began interrogating students. Rumors were flying off the gym walls about who knew what about what. Of course I reunited with my closest crew in the gym corner and began speculating about the situation, but like I said before, I hadn't told a soul about what I planned to do and ultimately did. And I knew in the seriousness of that moment that I couldn't tell anyone. Not even my closest homies who I had done some very questionable/criminal things with before. The police and school admin opted to keep the entire school on lockdown in the gym for the remainder of the day. Interestingly enough, every single one of my friends and cliques involved in planning a senior prank had been thoroughly interrogated, except for me. I was fucking dumbfounded to say the least. The eeriest part about the entire day happened right before we were finally allowed to leave. Police informed everyone that during this senior prank, 2 students in Columbine, Colorado, had entered their high school armed to the teeth and massacred 15 students and teachers. of course the police knew this and thought there was a connection between the two, hence the massive police presence. This obviously did not make me feel any better. Over the following weeks the interrogations continued. And the prank was the talk of the town, but nothing came of it as I kept the entire story to myself. I was absolutely dying to tell my closest friends what I had pulled off, but knew one peep of it would be my demise. The school year came to a close shortly thereafter, and so did the investigation. I absolutely could not believe that I was never once interrogated or even questioned about the incident. Given my willingness to lead the charge on planning the senior prank that year, I spent a great deal of time after that moment reflecting on how incredibly stupid of a thing it was for me to do, and can't even express how thankful I am no one was hurt or killed. But after all was said and done, I was proud of myself for keeping a secret like that from oozing out of my stupid pubescent mouth. It saved me from serious jail time, and for that I have no regrets. A few months passed before I told a buddy, and of course it took no time for it to spread amongst the inner circle of my crew. They knew the gravity of the situation and who needed to know and who didn't. Deleted, I have a similar situation. My brother was visiting us for Christmas. He went out with one of his girlfriend's cousins and they got pretty drunk. My brother didn't have a license due to issues in his 20s, so his friend drove. There was video surveillance of the friend driving the truck and doing donuts in the parking lot. We found out later from my brother's girlfriend that the vehicle they were in had a passenger side door that didn't fully latch closed. Apparently while driving home my brother leaned against the door, fell out, and his head was ran over. He died instantly. The friend was so concerned with covering his own ass that he swore up and down my brother was driving. Because he was the survivor, the cops took his word for it. I distinctly remember this guy showing up to the funeral and coming up to me. He said, "I'm sorry I killed your brother." He harassed us for months trying to ensure we weren't going to do further investigations because it was pretty clear the dude was drunk driving. He also would Facebook message me constantly trying to get me to go out on a date with him. I was 16, he was in his 30s, nothing ever happened to him. Even after a full investigation. I'll never understand how the ball was dropped on so many levels. First, how the staff at the bar let them drive home being very clearly hammered. Edit to add, my brother had a 7-year-old son at the time. I'll never forget him being curled up all night on the couch not understanding what happened, but knowing his dad died. Heartbreaking. Jenna 5366, when I was young, probably around 13 to 14, my mom and I were driving down a backroad highway, with a speed limit of 70 km per hour with traffic lights, if that paints a clearer picture, that connected our town with others. We passed an older car that had hit the guardrail badly. There was rubble and glass everywhere. The front of the car had begun smoking, so my mom and I decided to make a U-turn at the lights ahead, maybe 250 meters beyond the crash, to try to help/call an ambulance. While we drove to the lights, I noticed not a single person in their cars looked panicked or even acknowledged that there had been a horrible wreck. Normally when there is a wreck it's common for people to slow down and at least look. But not a single person around us was reacting. We turned around and, nothing. The car was gone. All evidence that a car had crashed was gone, the rubble, glass, everything. Even the air where there was smoke was clear. The freakiest part of all was the guardrail had no damage at all. We both looked at each other in confusion and tried to come up with a reasonable explanation of how a tow truck could have pulled up, hooked up the car, and moved it in under 30 seconds. We kept traveling in that direction for a couple of minutes to make sure we didn't miss it somehow, but we never found evidence of a car accident. It's been over 10 years and I brought it up recently. My mom said she remembered perfectly and always thought it was a weird glitch in the matrix. U/Bach30, I married the woman of my dreams 20 years ago. We eventually moved to a wonderful community, had very promising careers. She had a coworker who was struggling big time, and we decided to shack him up in our spare room while he could get his shit together. My best friend from high school was getting married, and I was super excited for him. It meant traveling several hundred miles to attend, and I was up for it. My wife was not, unsurprisingly, because she's incredibly self-conscious, particularly around people she's never met before, so be it. She wished me well, have a great time and so on, 3 days of joy and bliss. Reuniting with old friends I hadn't seen for several years. I received so much love. And I return home, glowing, full of love and joy. She picks me up at the bus station after my 12 hours on the road. As soon as I got in the car, I knew something was up. She and the new roomie slept together while I was away. Yeah, I knew he was into her, but he also showed me an enormous amount of respect. Yeah, I knew our marriage was kind of faltering a bit after almost 10 years together, but yeah, it happened. We tried to talk it out. Roomie had moved out before I even got home, tried to figure it all out. But it was obvious that everything crumbled that weekend. She and I are still super close. In the end, I think we probably should have been siblings instead of spouses. And her current partner of many, many years has become the closest friend I've ever had, so there's that. U/Holton phone, back when World of Warcraft was still very new, only a year or two old, I made an online friend in-game and we used to do dungeons and quests together. She was only online late at night, usually after 10 p.m. and would stay on until the very early hours of the morning. While I was struggling to get my main character to the level 60 bar, she was on her third or fourth character at that same level. In terms of hours spent in game, she was probably the most hardcore person I had ever encountered, literally spending 8 hours in the game every night. As an example, she owned a mount of a different race for at least 2 of her characters. For non-WoW people, this used to be a huge status symbol as it required hundreds of hours invested in the game. We played together off and on for a few months and then she vanished for a good 6 months. One day I log on and I'm pleasantly surprised to see she is online. I start up a conversation asking where she has been and she drops a bomb on me. She was a little old lady living in a retirement home and had been sneaking out of her room to play WoW each night on the senior center's shared computer. It was the only time of night where the other people at the senior center wouldn't be waiting in line to use a computer, and management was okay with her being on late at night because she wasn't hurting anybody. She told me that she recently had several health issues that prevented her from playing. We talked a little bit longer. She logged off a while later and I never saw her again. I've thought about the whole thing a lot over the years and I don't think it was someone pulling my leg, because why would they never log back into this account that they spent months and months working on? Plus there was never any 1337 speak that came out of her. It was always excellent grammar and really enjoyed helping people in the game. Anyway, kind of sad, but I'm glad she found something she really loved doing until she physically could not do it any longer. U/Fancy Artichoke, several years ago I got a knock on my door from the police asking me when I had last seen my neighbor. He was quite reclusive, so I only saw him a few times a month. His son had reported him missing when he hadn't answered his phone or the door. The next day, they found him in his basement. He had died of dehydration after getting trapped under a fallen shelf. At the time, I lived in a very rural area and mine was the only house even somewhat close to his. For about 3 or 4 days, around the time he is thought to have died, my dogs would bark incessantly at his house, pace the property line, and whine when I let them out. I kept going to see what they were looking at but I never saw anything. I wrote it off as an animal in the woods and recalled them each time. I'm hard of hearing. I realized in hindsight that they were likely barking at his cries for help that I couldn't hear. He probably heard me talking to my dogs when I let them out and screamed for help. He probably thought my barking dogs would be his saviors. Imaging how many times over the course of those days he heard my voice and my dogs, got his hopes up, and was let down makes me stomach turn. I hope he remembered I'm hard of hearing. I hope he didn't think I was ignoring him. Being hard of hearing never bothered me much, but after that, I wish that I wasn't. I've never told anyone. I still have nightmares sometimes of distant, muffled cries for help that I can't locate the source of. U/Vov 113, when I was 21, I was trying out that whole, being a responsible adult, paying your own bills, etc. dance, and for a while it was working out pretty well. Eventually though, I lost my job through some BS corporate restructuring, and it put me in a pretty bad place financially. Now I'm too proud to ask my family for bill money, right, and after a month or so of trying and failing to get a job, I take up shoplifting electronics and flipping them to make ends meet. because I'm young and dumb and can't see how this could ever backfire. After a while of this, I start stealing food too. Because what the hell, in for a penny, in for a pound, right? Well, one night, about 1 or 2 in the morning, I decide I want to get some cereal and some sinus medicine, and of course I'm not gonna pay for it. Something unprecedented, and also somehow incredibly predictable happens this particular night, and a police officer stops me on my way out of the store asking what's under my jacket. I tell him to get his hands off me, he pins me to a wall, and proceeds to spend 30 minutes tearing me a new one for ruining my life over $10 worth of merchandise. Of course, not knowing the $2,000 to $3,000 worth of electronics I've jacked over the past few months. So there I am, sitting in the back of a cruiser, thinking this is it, my life is over, blah blah blah, when the officer comes back from inside the store with the manager, pulls me out and basically tells me that I'm a dumbass, but he didn't want to ruin me over it, and the manager agreed not to press charges if I just never came back to that store. Then they tell me that it's not a crime to be down on your luck, next time to just ask for help, and they hand my grocery bag with the cereal, a loaf of bread, and the sinus medicine, and they take my handcuffs off and tell me to fuck off. But then, the kicker of the whole story, as I'm walking away, this cop calls me back over and asks how old I am. And I'm freaking out now, right, but I tell him I'm 21. Then this cop opens his trunk, pulls out a beer, hands it to me, and says, "I think you need this too. Now get the fuck out of here," and I ride off into the sunset, straighten up my ways, and have been walking the straight and narrow ever since.